and any members of the public watching online. Shall we begin? Anybody in attendance with an electronic device, please could you make sure that it is muted or silenced? And that your microphone is also muted unless you are speaking. Members accessing the meeting remotely should use their Swale Borough Council or Kent County Council laptop to participate virtually. If you join using the link on the website or on a mobile or tablet device, it's not always possible to identify you, and you may not be recorded as being in remote attendance. Welcome to the Housing and Health Committee meeting, including any visiting members. Have we got any visiting members? And anyone attending remotely, and any members of the public attending remotely, as we don't have any in the chamber. The following staff are in attendance in the council chamber: Head of Housing and Community Services, Charlotte Hudson, Community Services Manager, Steph Curtis, Democratic Services, Joe Millard, and attending online we have Housing Options Policy and Performance Officer, Zoe Calloway, and Kelly McKenzie from Democratic Services. There are any other officers that I've missed. Roxanne Shepherd I can see as well on the screen now. Yeah. Excellent. I will now outline the emergency evacuation procedure. So I'm sure we're all familiar with that are in here. Everyone. Don't come back until you're told to do so. There is no planned fire drill. There is no planned fire alarm. If it goes, it is to be treated as a regular alarm. Please do not use the lift. Does anybody present require assistance? Excellent. Are there any apologies for absence and confirmation of any substitutes, please?
Thank you, Chair. Apologies have been received from Councillor Elliot Jays and Councillor Lee McCall, but Councillor Jays is actually attending the meeting remotely. Thank you.
So the Councillors Tatton and Ingleton are attending remotely rather than in the chamber this evening. Item 3 is declarations of interest. Does anybody have any interest to declare on items on the agenda? Excellent. Okay, move on to the minutes. Members, are you happy to approve the minutes of the meeting held on the 17th of January 2023, minute numbers 580 to 584, as a true and correct record? I now believe there is a minor change in the agenda which Charlotte wanted to bring up before we start, so I should pass to Charlotte for that.
Yeah, just to highlight, let's get to the reference. So item 8, unfortunately, there was a mistake on the title of the report, and therefore that translated into the agenda. That should actually read the safeguarding policy refresh and adoption rather than the Swale Community Safety Strategic Assessment.
With that. So if you're in a remote attendance, please keep your microphones muted unless you've been asked to speak. So item 5 is the Housing Allocations Policy Review and Temporary Suspension of Housing Register. I will ask Charlotte to introduce the report, and I'm sure we'll no doubt end up going elsewhere as well.
Thank you, Chair. So this report really sets out a review of the housing allocations policy, which Zoe Calloway, who's online, undertook the piece of work, so is available to answer any sort of the detailed questions, as she knows the policy and the housing register inside out. When we adopted the, or Cabinet adopted the current policy back in November 2020, at that point it was called in and scrutinised as well, because concerns were raised about some of the changes that were made, and it was asked that we review the policy within a couple of years and bring forward that review, which obviously is now into that, to the committee system. So the review has been undertaken, and the conclusion from officers is that actually it's had a positive impact in terms of relieving homelessness to those most in need, and it also hasn't caused too much burdensome work with additional applications on the register, and Zoe has included within the report some data around that. So that's kind of our recommendations at the moment, is the policy is fit for purpose and we don't recommend any changes, but be interested to hear anything from members that we should keep under review going forward. As part of the policy review, we constantly review any case law or anything that comes up in terms of any legislation changes and things like that that might impact. And there's nothing that we currently need to do because that was all captured or preempted in the last review, particularly around sort of the Domestic Abuse Act. We also thought this was an opportune time within this report to highlight that there is a change to the software system that manages both the Housing Register and our Housing Options Service. So we're moving over to a new system called Hume, and that's a Kent-wide system change. As with all IT change processes, there is a key requirement to make sure that any data is transferred appropriately, and we obviously have legal duties to make sure that it is accurate when it transfers and goes live. This has resulted in a temporary suspension of the Housing Register, and we thought that it was appropriate to include details of that within this report. There will be a process in place to consider anybody vulnerable and in high housing need within that period of time. But clearly, people stay on the Housing Register generally for longer than 4 weeks, so it won't actually have a detriment effect to anybody. But there is that vulnerable clause within there, and we'll make sure, should we need that, that we can take that forward. That is all I have to say. I'd say Zoe is the one with the detailed knowledge and undertook the review. So I don't know if there's anything that she would like to add or any questions.
Anything you'd like to add before we go to questions, Zoe?
No, nothing further to add to Charlotte's update.
Wonderful. So are there any questions from members on this one? I see one hand, Councillor Palmer.
Well, my experience of software people, when they say a month, it normally turns into 6 months.
Yeah.
How will you cope if something then does, a crossover doesn't occur and it does extend over the month period? How are we going to take that challenge on? Thank you.
Yeah. So there has been quite a lot of planning around the transfer of the system and a lot of testing that is already going on at the moment. I will pass over to Zoe in a second, because I think the only thing that Zoe is currently looking at in this world is that database and getting it ready for the transfer, and there will be testing beforehand. So it is just the data transfer over the month period, and the month's been allowed to do that. They do operate this housing management system and housing register in a number of other authorities as well. So it has been sort of tried and tested. But I said Zoe is integral into the steering group, so I don't know if there's anything that Zoe wants to add.
Yes, the leeway has already been built in, so it is estimated it should only take a matter of days. The testing's going ahead, but if it does, the reason for the month is if the first one fails, there's time to do further. But as this is across Kent, so it will not go past. The new website will be live 1st of July.
Councillor Whiting.
I'm happy to support the proposals. Just one question about the size of the waiting list at the moment under this policy. We talk about percentages in here. I think there were 8% who wouldn't have qualified but now do, and I just wondered what are the numbers that sit now on the housing register?
I'm going to pass this one over to Zoe because I could give you an estimate. She probably can give you the exact number.
Thank you, Chair.
Yes, live applications right now 1,447.
Thank you. It's for you, Chair. So we've got just under 1,500 people on the housing waiting list, and I just wondered what the officers' view was on the expectation that will be reduced substantially over the next 12 months or so, through whatever other policies the council has adopted to deal with the issue. Of course, that more and more people are presenting us in the.
Yeah, so if I can come in there. So I think obviously within the housing option service, two key strands, those people that present to us as homeless and those with a homeless need, or a housing need, sorry, not rather than a homeless need. So the housing register will pick up a wider scope of people. They can be people that are sort of have overcrowding issues, or the accommodation inappropriate for them at the time to meet the criteria within the housing allocations policy. we need affordable housing to be available, and obviously building more affordable housing is a key way to reduce the register or move people through. Of course, there's always new applicants that come, so as soon as you house people, quite frequently there are people to take their place. So we would see that being one of the things. One of the other areas that we are looking to work with our housing association partners quite considerably is the voids period of properties, which can be quite a long time period, particularly with availability of workmen and materials at the moment. So that is something that we are actively working with. So I think it is about the delivery of new affordable housing, which we obviously have seen quite good results in over the last few years, and the projected pipeline of sites is also quite available.
Yeah, just to come in on voids, not only are we working with the housing associations, most are striving to get them down for their own purposes as well, because actually a void period is a period where there's no money coming in. And let's face it, the inflation cost pressures that housing associations face are the same as everybody else is facing, 11, 12%, and the cap on rent increases is 7%. So it's in their best interests too. I think I'm right in saying now most housing associations in Kent are targeting 4 weeks as a void period. One of the methods for trying to get that down is encouraging people when they're putting in their notice to end tenancy to encourage them to bring the property back up to the rentable standard that they should have been maintaining it to in the first place. At the same time, the housing associations have got to get their houses in order in terms of repairs. But
if I can, Joe, I'm really grateful, because I think it's important background to some of what is actually quite a short paper, but a really important paper. I just wondered if I can, through you, Chair, just a final question. Are we seeing a change in the circumstances under which people are now applying to go on the housing register, to say we were 3-4 years ago? Are people coming with different reasons for wanting to get on the housing register, or expecting to, quite rightly in most cases, expecting to get on that housing register? Is there a difference in the circumstances of those applying? A noticeable one over the last, say, pick a figure, 2-3 years.
We'll pass over to sort of Roxanne and Zoe in a moment, because they're more in touch with the clients that come through the door every day. I think what we absolutely know, you need to meet the eligibility criteria within the policy to approach. So people will need to what we do know is that the private rented sector is becoming completely unaffordable. And therefore, I think people are looking at wider options, and obviously social housing, if you meet the criteria, is extremely attractive, because it checks your rental level and you understand where you are in terms of your finances. The private rented sector is much more volatile at the moment, and people are finding it difficult to afford it.
Thank you.
Councillor Harrison.
Thanks, Chair. There was also, which we discussed at great length at the last meeting, in Ukraine who have been invited over by our government, who for whatever reason have had breakdowns in the family, in the host families, and have had no choice but to present as homeless. And we have no choice, not that I'd want one to be fair, but to take them on board. And I know that's an issue up and down the country. I blame it on Maggie Thatcher's selling off the council houses myself. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. I'd like to go back to Councillor Whiting's first question, which wasn't answered. Does Charlotte expect the figures to go in the next 12 months? She put all the reasons why they might go down, but does she expect them to go down or to go up? Yes,
I think we are expecting more people are eligible, and people move through, and more people more people add onto that. It's an extremely difficult area to predict, but we know we have extreme challenges in terms of, say, cost of living pressures and interest rate changes and various other things. We are continually trying to juggle that with policy decisions to maintain the situation. But as we all know, housing is a particularly challenging area of work in this country at the moment.
Well, I believe some residents are now experiencing it where they go to private rentals, and rather than having to pay the amount that is advertised by the estate agent, it's a case of how much can you afford to pay over the top to take this property, because there's that many people applying for each private rental. So I wouldn't normally, but I'll allow you to speak on this occasion from the beyond and the ether.
Can't unmute him now because he was.
Sorry, Councillor Tatton, you need to unmute yourself.
That's it.
Can you hear me now?
We can.
I would like to know something really that is specific to the caravan site occupiers that have become overstayers, and if we're able to get them back to their agreement of maximum 10 months, they then go out and sign on to the housing list. But this shouldn't be happening because they've signed documentation in their terms and conditions that they have a primary address to return to. Why aren't we enforcing this rather than putting them on the housing list?
So,
Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Tatton. So I think they're different issues, if I'm honest. So to access the housing register, you need to meet our eligibility criteria. Some of that is reliant on your previous experience, your previous circumstances and things like that. Each case does need to be taken on an individual basis because somebody might have been utilising a caravan for a short-term reason and be looking at how they relieve their own homelessness and things like that. So it's not a blanket policy. We need to look at each individual case and assess it against the criteria that is set out in the policy.
Well, in due respect, I'm now advised that the number of caravan occupiers that are basically looking at permanent residency, right, on a 10-month site are getting what they want, and in addition, council tax allowance.
Councillor Tatton, that's not an issue to do with the housing allocations policy, and I would also ask that you go through the chair rather than just responding immediately, please, in future.
Sorry, Chair.
Thank you. So through that, I think there's no other hands that I can see. I will address one point that was made around the eligibility. They are pre-screened. So when you go onto the Kent Home Choice website, you have to go through a pre-screening questionnaire before it lets you go for the application to apply. Which is quite convenient because it means that if you don't qualify, you use 10 minutes of your time, not 55 to 60 minutes of your time, filling out a quite detailed application and submitting all sorts of documents. So with that, I should propose from the chair. Could I have a seconder, please? We've got Councillor Harrison. All those in favour of recommendations 1 and 2? That is unanimous. On to item 6, which is the health systems in Kent. Which of our lovely officers are introducing this one? Charlotte?
Okay. So this paper really is to provide the committee with an update on the changes to the health system in Kent. Obviously, as the remit of this committee is Housing and Health Committee, it was felt that it was appropriate to sort of bring members up to date with quite significant changes and partnership arrangements which Scarborough Council are part of in terms of the integrated care system and more locally sort of the health and care partnerships that we operate within. So this just really sets out, and I'm not planning to go through it all because I know you've already it, just what the structures look like in Kent and therefore in Swale. Just wanted to point out one quite significant piece of information is that Swale as a borough is split in two as part of the integrated care system and the health and care partnership that sit underneath it. So the Isle of Sheppey and Sittingbourne fall within the Medway and Swale health and care partnership, whereas in Faversham and the surrounding rural part there falls within the East Kent health and care partnership. So that does present us with some challenges, not only in terms of physically how we engage, but also sort of the different health inequalities that sit within those two areas and how possibly we would respond to those. So I just wanted to point out sort of that area of concern, I suppose. I think the paper is quite self-explanatory in terms of those areas of work. There are quite a lot of subgroups and partnerships that sit underneath the main health and care partnership that we are regularly invited to. Things such as the voluntary sector framework is becoming increasingly important, as we know our voluntary sector absolutely do quite a lot of preventative work and supportive work and that sort of wraparound care. So there has been quite a lot of focus, particularly within the Medway and Swale partnership, on working with our voluntary sector, which we are also engaged with.
Lovely. So go to the questions. There's first hand, any hand? Big hand, Councillor Gould.
I was just wondering how much cooperation we're getting from the ICB about with regards to input on planning and for health infrastructure, particularly when it comes to new developments, and whether that's something that is they're organised about yet after having had their reorganisation.
Yeah, I can answer that one quite easily actually, because we do regularly meet with the leads within the integrated care system on their sort of asset portfolios, and particularly around sort of Section 106 contributions that have come forward. It is always a challenging area between what developers want to provide and what the needs and requirements, and also the projections going forward. There is some ongoing work at the moment with our local plan team to do a little bit more detailed mapping and projection work. I think there's a meeting coming up next week to delve a little bit more deeper into that. I think it's an area that we all recognise can be better, but officers are actively working to try and make it better and provide that information to planning committee and as part of that local plan process.
Councillor Whiting.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. And again, thank Charlotte and her colleagues for the report. But two questions, and you forgive me if I hang a hat here, but the continued lack. No, we can hang hats, Councillor Harrison.
No, you can try.
You and I are past masters.
You can try.
You can try. The residents of Tenement Linstead, of course, without the doctor's surgery. And I don't think that gives them the fair and equitable access to health services that this paper suggests that the ICS, for example, expects residents of Kent and Medway to have. And so I would just, through you, Chair, hope that all efforts are being made to see a return of a GP surgery. There was 3,800 patients on that list who have to travel to Faversham or to Sittingbourne to see a GP. And we know that the bus services have just been cut drastically to Tenement Linstead and completely to Conyers, and most of the time to Linstead Village. So getting people into town to see a GP it is paramount, I would have thought, of the work of the ICS, because it's a left behind group at the moment, and I welcome some comments back from Charlotte on that. And the only other hat I'll hang, and I hope that Councillor Harrison will forgive me, Chair, under 2.3, the first point, giving children the best start in life, making sure they're not disadvantaged by where they live. I think the collapse of the Oasis Academy on Sheppey, as has the collapse of various trusts that have tried to run the senior education system on Sheppey over the years, is a complete and abject failure. And I would hope that the educationally and all the health ramifications of a good education, and particularly mental health, can bring. I would hope that the ICS is deeply involved in conversations with government to sort out what I believe system that is disadvantaging young people on Sheppey, completely contrary to bullet point 1 on 2.3. Thank you, Chair.
Yeah, so thank you, Councillor Whiting, for questions. So in terms of Tenem and Linstead, I recently met with the estates team from the ICS, and they are actively working with the resident GP that was previously at Tenem and Linstead and obviously is temporarily at the Memorial Medical Centre. So they are working with him and the aim is to find permanent premises within Tenem and Linstead, and that, I believe, is his ambition as well. And they are, it's definitely on their agenda to try and resolve that. They do need to find, obviously, the correct premises and funding formulas to make those things happen, but it is actively being pursued. And if we get any further updates with any positive news, we obviously would share that with you as ward members anyway, but we can collectively share that with the committee going forward. In terms of Oasis, obviously, KCC Education are actively looking at and working with DFE on what comes next, but clearly there is the wider determinants of health issue here, and about how people can learn and people can be able to be present to learn, and the family support that comes around that. The wider determinants of health is very much on KCC's public health agenda, as well as part of the integrated care systems. I would say those objectives set out in 2.3 are very much the ambitions of where we should be and what we should be aiming at, and I believe that there's a collective agreement for that. We have significant inequalities in parts of our borough, and we need to lobby everyone else just as much to make sure that is represented. So having those key priorities enables us to put that pressure on as well.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Charlotte. And just to add to that, it's not just around education and around health in this regard. We have to remember the preventative health as well, which has been cut to beggary over the last few years. I think I'm right in saying Swale still has some of the lowest uptakes of breastfeeding in the county. And when we lost those breastfeeding peer supporters that used to go into the children's centres, which are also now at risk, we lost a really key resource, which saves absolute millions, tens of millions to the NHS over the course, just by making sure that families breastfeed early on for those first few months. If that's lost, and we've got to make sure that we don't lose more services like that going forward. And I'm sure this committee will try and hold others to account and lobby the same way that many members of it have over the past few years. Councillor Palmer.
Thank you, Chair. I was going to help one of the same points as Councillor Whiting, and you're quite right, Chair, about the other services that really don't come up to standard anymore. GP service really isn't mentioned in this. It's great, it all sounds good on paper, but the reality for many people is they will spend hours in the morning trying to phone and get an appointment. The whole gateway to a lot of people for care is their local GP. Even when they go to a walk-in centre in desperation, or they phone 111 and they finish up in Medway, they're normally sent back with patching up or whatever. But you must go and take this to your GP and get them to arrange an appointment or to refer you to a specialist, and that's where the system falls down. And the other area of concern, and I think it affects what I call cross-border. I'm quite lucky, I've got a very good GP, but he's Medway based. But I get complaints from people who are under that practice, mainly if they're in hospital, and it tends to be elderly who need social care when they come out, that it's disjointed. You know, the hospital don't realise people in Swale don't come under Medway, and at the last minute a care package is withdrawn, but a person is then sent home without a care package, which I've been assured by the CCG would never happen and should never happen, but it does happen quite regularly. So there is, you know, absolutely fantastic, but where's the GPs? And without adequate GPs, it's great having a doctor's surgery, and if you get a GP, whatever, if the GP moves down from Sittingbourne Memorial to Tenham, it doesn't help because you've still got the same number of people and the same number of GPs. So, but that's a long-term government inaction on that, because, you know, it takes 10 years for a GP and 13 years, and we're still scratching around saying that we need more GPs. But very nice report, but I don't think the people on the ground see that reality at all. Thank you.
I think just to sort of respond to those issues, and I think they're issues that are raised quite frequently, the latest changes within the health system are to try and address some of those issues, and I think we are really in early days of them creating this new structure, particularly around health and social care being more equal partners, to make it integrated, because it, you know, there's been numerous, I've heard over the years, numerous concerns around exactly the scenario that you've mentioned. I think the positive element of this is that we actually have a seat at this table a lot more than we did within the CCG arrangement, so we can actually raise the issues for residents and the on the ground information, because without that sort of regular feedback, people don't know the full picture, and some people will just give up about trying to phone and make contact or do that. Some people complain, and then that goes into the system. So there is a lot of work to do. I don't think anyone's saying that there isn't a lot of work to do, but this is the proposals to go forward, and I think if we say that we do absolutely have a seat at the table and how we can utilise that. And I say we have a seat at the table at many different levels as well, from a member's perspective to Emma Wiggins as director sits on the local health and care partnership board, and we interact in a lot of the groups. So we have opportunities that maybe we didn't have before.
Cool, thank you.
Just to clarify, that's the Swale and Medway Health and Care Partnership Board, not the East Kent. Councillor Harrison.
Chair, I was going to make a couple of points on planning. I have raised, and I will continue to raise, the issue of the number of properties before contributions kick in. Certainly Medway Swale, I don't think we should be the junior partner. If Medway have got 10 as a number and we got 20, I'm quite happy to go with 10 like Medway. And I have raised that and asked them to look at it. The problem with the ICB is that they are spending time, not too much, I mean, not as much as they used to in the past, on structures and getting people in place. There is still work being done while these structures are being set up and all the rest of it. So the things that I mean, that was something that came from here, our planning committee, to be fair. So I'm going to continue raising that. Well, every month I do another email just to remind them that I'm forgotten. And that would obviously affect anything in Faversham, because Swale Planning Committee has an overall thing. We don't divvy up Sittingbourne, Sheppey and Faversham, so that would apply overall. I've also raised the issue of, I'm going to call them aids, like sticks and walkers. This is not the technical term, so you know what I mean. Crutches. They go swings and roundabouts, but at one point, and it hasn't changed much over the years, I had a little blip where you could take these things back, but it got to the stage where you got a pair of crutches at the hospital one day, you went to take them back the next day, and it was, oh no, we can't have those, chuck them in the bin, words to that effect. And there is an awful lot of kit out there in our communities where people begrudged putting this stuff in the dump. But that is one of the areas that they are looking at, to actually bring stuff, allow people to bring back in to hospitals around Kent, so that they, I mean, some of them just need a wash down. It is such a waste of money. Anyway, so that's another one on the horizon. And the other one that I'm working on is contracts that they have with particularly triage things, and things that are not you going in a hospital bed. Because if you go online, you say, well, if I go to Medway, it might be 32 days. If I go to William Harvey, it might be 62 days. I know I'm going to go to Medway. And that's fine if you're having some sort of operation. But the rest of the stuff that's on contracts, like the triage for a variety of things, it just seems to be a big black hole. What I've said is that if you've got contracts with people, with businesses, whatever you want to call them, there must be like KPIs. There must be monitoring. So why can't we publish who does what and when? Because, for example, we've just let a waste contract. Now, I'm pretty darn sure that waste contract doesn't just say, if you wouldn't mind emptying a few bins now and again, and if you really feel up to it, tell us when you've done them. But that seems to be how contracts in some places seem to work. And I've said that certainly from the local government perspective, we are expected to be very transparent in the contracts that we have, the monitoring that takes place, and any problems with them. And I would expect the same with the NHS. So I'm starting off with Medway Swale. Got a meeting next week with the ones that they're supposedly looking after. But then I'll talk to the East Kent people, because I think it's important. If you know that your triage is going to be, I don't know, 5 weeks, then that, you know, you wait your 5 weeks. If you're told it's 2.5 weeks and 4 weeks later you're still waiting, then there's a problem with that contract, and you can raise it. But all the time it's, oh, well, you know, just sit and wait patiently, people. And people do wait weeks and weeks and weeks. And then in the end, they contact the GP surgery, and the GP surgery has to go on. So I think transparency, if people know, then at least they know where the situation is. So that's one of the other areas that I'm working on, Mr. Chairman. I thought I'd just let you know.
Thank you, Councillor Harrison. I will allow Councillor Whiting.
Thanks, Chair. I appreciate coming back. There's just a couple of little things I just wanted to clarify from what the GP that is working at the Memorial was the GP that was working at Tenham. The fight is to get him returned. It's not taking a GP away from the Memorial to the detriment of the people in Sittingbourne that were already using those services. It's saying we must find some premises. But that battle goes to the heart of what Councillor Harrison was saying. The NHS is opaque. I used to sit on the Kent and Medway Health Overview Scrutiny Committee. I'm sure Councillor Harrison has in the past. I ask a question, 8 people from the NHS turn up with 8 different answers, all blaming each other for why it's not happened. And that continues. And it's a failure of endless numbers of health secretaries that they haven't sorted that out, so that you can get to the situation that Councillor Harrison describes, where you can expect somebody to whom you are paying multi-million-pound contracts to do what they said they would do, and what they're paid to do in a timely fashion. With regard to GPs, which again alludes to what Councillor Palmer was saying. I mean, it's not a political night, but people keep blaming the government for stuff. I will say thank you to the Kent County Council, Conservative-run Kent County Council, and the Conservative government for investing heavily in a medical school in Canterbury, along with the universities, to ensure that we can train the GPs of the future we need, and that we know that if you train locally, you tend to then work locally. So the long-term aim of that medical school, and it will be 10 years before it comes to fruition, is that we can train GPs locally here in Kent with the expectation that a large number of them will want to stay in Kent and not disappear the other side of Dartford to get their London waiting, as so many other public servants unfortunately do. So I just think, you know, let's keep this apolitical, please. But if you're going to start knocking, I just felt the need to come back. Thank you, Chair.
Councillor Gould.
I probably have lots of interests in this one. If I could come back on the planning issue, just as the having difficulty finding premises in Tenham and Linstead. I think frequently in planning applications one sees a suggestion that the developer will provide a GP surgery. And I think, and in fact, recently there's been a scoping report about a possible planning application for Winterbourne Fields in Dunkirk about this, where they said that, yeah, we'll put a GP surgery in for 1,700 homes. But I think one issue that probably isn't stressed is actually the viability of some of these proposals. A housing development like that, even fully built out, would be to support about 4,500 people. That's about 200 GPs. That isn't a viable practice these days. And so I think it's really important that the ICB are consulted on things like this, that they actually challenge some of the assertions that are made about health provision by actually looking at the reality of what it takes to run a practice these days. The days of a couple of GPs in a lock-up shop are long gone. My practice, I think we're pushing about 90 different people in it. It's a big organisation to provide that sort of number of different people, and small branch surgeries are, notwithstanding that the need for them in communities that already exist, aren't really going to be the answer for new communities, which the planners might, developers might wish to suggest. And I think that's an area, in order to stop creating the same sort of situation as has been described, where people are remote from facilities, that needs to be really taken on board.
Just going to come back on that very quickly. What you're saying absolutely mirrors what the ICS are saying to us, and that's why they're working closely with the local plan team to look at projected developments in different locations and what longer term solutions. I think they particularly find it quite frustrating when developers put into planning applications that they will provide a GP surgery and they haven't even spoken to them to know if it's viable or anything like that. So I think that's quite, I think there's a shared frustration, and it is something that needs to be resolved in the way that planning goes forward.
If I may, in fact, on this in particular one, they actually hadn't even got the CCG right, or the fact that it was an ICS in the application that went in this week. They were saying Swale CCG when it's clear in East Kent, and it's neither Swale CCG or East Kent ECG existing.
Completely, and your point is not lost on myself either. I mean, let's face it, I remember the old surgery at Bank Street before it had its adaptions and the X-ray machine and the rest of it, and it was just a room. Obviously, there's an awful lot more that goes into a GP surgery now. You've got an awful lot more equipment to do diagnostics. That's needed. There's no point in having a GP surgery with one GP and a flannel, a bed, and a book. Because quite frankly, all they're going to be doing is referring over, oh, you need to go over to the hospital and have this test done. What's the point? You've got to have it right. And because everything always does link back, before we go to the vote, I'll just remind, Councillor Harrison reminded me with the word AIDS and adaptions. How many times do we find that because AIDS and adaptions can't be done quick enough to a property, you can't send someone discharged from hospital? It's the same with the care plans. It all links back. Housing and health always come together. So on that, I should propose that we note the report, and I require a seconder. Councillor Harrison's there, and All in favour? That is unanimous. Thank you very much. We shall now go on to item 7, which is the temporary accommodation policy. Charlotte.
Thank you, Chair. So this paper really is looking to regularise what has been custom and practice within the service for a long period of time. As we discussed probably in quite a lot of detail at the last meeting, we do have high numbers of people within temporary accommodation, and we are struggling to find suitable temporary accommodation, particularly in the emergency situations. So we do end up placing outside of the borough quite frequently, and the aim is always to get people back as quickly as possible. There are also a number of things that the clients are informed of around how they can utilise the property, contributions that they may need to provide, requirements around pets or not having pets within the property. And we just felt that while we've been doing review work, that this wasn't necessarily out in the open as transparent as it should be, and therefore we wanted to formally bring this forward, and the custom and practice that we've had in place and the sort of draft principles that we have been utilising for a long period of time, they are formalised and accessible to members of the public. So it's very clear about how we allocate temporary accommodation, but also how we move people and what people's rights and responsibilities are. So this is really about trying to improve the transparency of the service that we offer, and I think is quite self-explanatory, and also makes it quite clear what situations take priority over others when we're dealing with quite difficult accommodation to source. I think that's all I have to say.
So before I go to questions, I'll just sum it up in simple phrases. This is out there, but it's all over the place. So this is about bringing everything into one document so that the general public can see quite plainly on the website. There's the policy. Happy days. It's what we've been doing. It's just, yeah, at the moment, dig on the website, you've got to check about 12 documents or something ridiculous. So happy days on that one. Councillor Harrison.
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, so it's already there, it's just pulling it together. What I thought reading this was, can we put this on that pile which says the new council, part of the training, education, here's your bundle of documents that you might need as a, whether it's new councillors or existing councillors coming back. Certainly all the time I've been here, there's always stuff to learn. You can never learn enough because everything's changing. But I do think that as we're going along, I now and again email Larissa and say, oh yeah, and by the by, I think that would be useful. I think this would be really useful for the new intake or the intake in May. And perhaps that could be put in that pile. Thanks.
That's an affirmative from Charlotte and Councillor Whiting.
Thank you. I agree with the sentiments just expressed by Councillor Harrison. I think making this part of the training for new councillors and already serving councillors that may be re-elected in May would be a good thing. And I do agree also it brings a whole load of custom and practice under one umbrella, which is really helpful. On page 23 under 7 criteria, some of that kind of falls apart a little bit. I'd just like some perhaps discussion from officers about some of that. I'm really pleased that under little 2 and little 5, we are making a conscious decision to protect children's education by not moving them out of the borough. If you have a particular need, there is no point in you moving from Sittingbourne where that need is being met to Dover, where it won't be met necessarily. So I really do welcome little 2 and little 5 there. But under 7.2, they're not in priority order. It's not an exhaustive list. And there may be other circumstances that may, now I get that as a catch-all, but when it comes to considering this and its equivalence within the housing the general housing allocations policy, and it's still quite 7.2 introduces a level of greyness that perhaps we might want it to have distilled down a little bit further. So I just welcome some comment. I mean, I support this paper, Chairman, absolutely, but I have doubts over that grey area that 7.2 introduces.
Thank you for those comments. So I think the principle of the whole 7 category is very much about access to services, and when people have got additional needs. I think a lot of people, unfortunately, within temporary accommodation have a lot of needs, so it is about prioritising those and the availability of what comes up. Absolutely, there is a lot of judgment call here with the officers, and I think this is kind of why it has been custom and practice for a period of time. But every case is different, and I think every judgment that every housing officer makes every day is on that spectrum of everybody's got some level of need. It's just about how high is that level of need. And if we've got 2 households that we can bring back in, and one of those households ticks quite a lot of those boxes and the other one doesn't, it's very straightforward. If it's a way and up situation, it will be a professional judgment call based upon that, and it might take other things into consideration to make that judgment call. It's very difficult to prescribe everybody's circumstances because they are becoming more and more complex as they go on.
Thank you.
I think we've also got to take into account with the general housing allocations policy, you've got an assessment period. You've got time to look at it. When it's the temporary one, quite often these are decisions being made in minutes, maybe an hour. I'll let Roxanne correct me if I'm wrong on that sort of time frame. But I know there have been times when it is a case of a phone call and that's the person on call. If you're getting through from the centre to the person on call, 1, you're waking them up at God knows what time of night, and 2, it's right, yeah, I've got the card, I need to put them in now, and that's happened a few times. So it's a much more tricky one to put prescriptively.
Chairman, if I just say thank you for that, I do appreciate that, and when we're talking about member in that, what you've just articulated, I think could be better articulated than it is in any report. I fully understand that urgency of decision. Thank you.
I will check if Rox wants to come in and correct me for being wrong. I'm hoping not.
No, and I think as Charlotte says, it's very complex, and there's a very, lots of different households with an awful lot of need. Some coming in for an assessment in the daytime, but as you say, some, maybe coming in through out of hours where, we're limited with the information we can gather at that time.
Further questions before we move? As ever, propose, and a seconder, please. Councillor Harrison, nice and quick. And all those in favour of the recommendation to adopt? Excellent, that is unanimous. 8 is the safeguarding policy, not the Swale Community Safeguarding Strategic Assessment.
No, apologies for confusion with the title. Clearly, I've read a few too many reports as of late. We all managed to miss that one, so hopefully it didn't cause too much confusion. So I'm bringing forward to you today to approve the refreshed safeguarding policy for 2023. The safeguarding policy in general was revised annually to make sure that any procedural or legal changes or sort of legislative changes are taken into account. There was a slight delay in sort of that review this year while we were awaiting the outcome of a couple of external audits that have been undertaken of the sort of safeguarding service by the Kent Safeguarding Children's Multi-Agency Partnership and the Kent and Medway Safeguarding Adults Board. I've summarised within the report sort of the main areas that have actually been changed, and I'm not going to go through those in any great detail, but there are a couple of references to different sort of changing legal duties. We're also going through the process of adopting a separate domestic abuse policy in line with the national accreditation that we're going for, so there's been some references made to that within the document. One of the areas that we have amended probably slightly more than some of the areas has been around training. This is training for staff, sorry. So again, part of this does reflect the domestic abuse work that we're doing and the enhanced training that we'd like to see there. but also that as time has gone on, we've identified a couple of areas where we feel that actually staff should have a greater level of training, particularly for those services such as housing that are sort of those that are encountering the most safeguarding cases. So we've amended the type of roles and have added in some advisory training sessions there. And we have one of the areas that we've seen an increase in sort of the categories of safeguarding concerns coming forward is around self-neglect. So we have actually created a self-neglect fact sheet that we've sort of added in as an appendix to this document to just help staff kind of know how to get started with that. So yeah, so those are sort of the document highlights most of the changes, but please let me know if you have any comments or questions.
With that, we go to questions, and Councillor Harrison.
Thanks, Chair. Post-May again. I was going to say unfortunate, but perhaps that's the wrong terminology. I have had a number of cases where it has been an adult safeguarding issue. I know a number of members who've spoken to me over this last 3 and a bit years have raised issues relating to neighbour nuisance, which have turned out to be, it's not a nuisance neighbour, you know, that the individual has issues and it turns out that it's a safeguarding issue. It's not that that neighbour is being difficult, that neighbour has some issues. I'm trying to be as vague as I possibly can be, data protection. So I think that this is also, and I know that there's so many things that members not need to know, but should know pretty soon off the mark. And this is one of them, how to deal with, we've all had it. God, they're a nuisance. They keep doing this, they keep doing that, they keep doing that. Can't you do something about it? Can't you get the police? Can't you get the enforcement? Can't you do this? But in actual fact, if you're tuned in, it is a safeguarding issue and you don't need to go through all that really heavy stuff. You go and talk to Steph who will sort it out for you. But it's actually identifying what the issue is, and don't just take on board what the complainant is saying, because the complainant clearly has an issue, as we all would. But try and look underneath that and say, well, actually, it isn't just an antisocial behaviour thing, which actually would be Steph as well. But it is, it could be a safeguarding. It could be a safeguarding thing. And I think the more that I've gone into this over the years, the more I think that quite a lot of this stuff can be dealt with long term if it's dealt with through safeguarding rather than enforcement of antisocial behaviour. And having said that, that members need to be aware of this. We need to make sure that all the staff, as we get the turnover, particularly people in the wardeny type roles, I can't remember the words, that they're aware of this as well, that it isn't just, I know the last one I spoke to said, oh yeah, I thought it was a safeguarding issue, councillor, and I've referred it down the line. I thought great for you, but the next one coming in might not. So, there's horses for courses, but it isn't always the obvious problem that you're told when your resident comes and says, sort it.
Thank you, Councillor Harrison. Councillor Palmer.
Actually, I've reread what I was going to ask the question on. It's covered in the report, which is quite clear. Thank you.
Excellent. To sum up, Councillor Harrison pretty much said it. Safeguarding is everybody's business, and I think going forward we do need to look at the member training post-May and age old. I always say if you can do the online courses, they're generally a darn sight better than a bloke chatting to people in the room at 7 o'clock when everyone's been at work all day, because generally they're not taking it in. Councillor Whiting.
Yes, thank you, Chair. I know you summed up. I didn't hear that before you summed up, but again, just to agree again, I'm not. This is a good idea. I think this is one of the benefits of this committee system. A lot of our policies, if they change because of national legislation changes, we delegate that to officers just to do it. But this gives us the opportunity as members to highlight the fact that we do have policies, that we are creating those policies and maintaining them in the proper manner for the benefit of residents. To highlight those things that perhaps members of who aren't in this committee and new members coming in need to be aware of. So I think this is, in a sense, the committee system working really well in bringing these matters forward. It's not just for us to nod it through, but it is for us to comment when perhaps a lot of it could have just been done under delegated powers and hidden from all of us and hidden from the wider society. So grateful that the item has been put on the agenda. Thank you, Chair.
And with that, I shall propose, and there's only the one recommendation to adopt, I'm guessing. Yes, there is. And that back to the front page. Propose to adopt. Second is going to be Councillor Gould, got his hand up there, very nice and quick. All those in favour? Unanimous again. Thank you very much. Let's move on to item 9, which is the forward decisions plan, which I know you wanted to do some alterations on as well.
Yes, thank you, Chair. So just to note, obviously, currently on the forward plan, we've got the items that we've just discussed at this committee, which obviously can now be removed from the forward plan. And within so that would be 3 remaining items. So the finalisation of housing strategy, which is out to consultation at the moment, that will be brought back as the first meeting of the civic year. The housing assistance policy will be brought back and is aimed at the second meeting of the new civic year. And the third item, which is nightly let procurement awards, so that is currently live. It's a joint procurement between Tunbridge Wells, Maidstone and Swale. That closes very shortly, and we will need to bring that through all of the various decision-making processes of the various councils. So we will be aiming to bring that to the first meeting of the civic year. And we're very hopeful that that will give some positive results. But I don't think I've got any other items at the current time to add to the board plan.
Lovely, thank you very much. Any questions on that before we wrap up?
Thank you, Chair. It's just a suggestion, really. We can take that health item earlier, which I think was very helpful in how things work. I mean, these bodies have meetings on a regular basis, and I just wonder whether an annual report back to here from the integrated care system, how, whichever part of it, or even twice a year, just a report back to say, actually, these are the things it's been discussing, these are the things it thinks is important. Again, to give some members some input into that, so that our representatives, be they political or officer calibre, on those, and some feedback from members around this table about what is considered important for our residents here in Swale. And there's other ways to feed that all through, but I think again, it's the transparency. See, I'm sure I can go online and find the minutes, but I think that's probably not the best way to do it.
Harrison.
No, we had whenever it was, we agreed the integrated care strategy. It was out to consultation, like 10 minutes, quite literally, because the government said, and this is not on the go, because it's just the government says, right, you've got to have an integrated care strategy. By the way, you've got to have it in by here. So you knock up a draft, you whack it out online, and then you get it back. Yes, it is a bit skeletal, but it's for us to put the meat on the bones as we go forward. So it is a live document. So that might well be, you can feed in at any time. So it might well be that we look at the integrated care strategy at some point in the new civic year, and say, right, when you're doing your review, we think these are the sort of things that should be in it. But it was so quick, and it wasn't for lack of them wanting to be transparent. It was just the time frame that the government, let's be fair, it was the Department of Health put in place to actually get it done. But it is a working document. It's permanently live, so there is no reason why we can't have that here and say, right, let's put a bit more meat on the bones.
Once or twice a year, whatever suitable.
Yeah, I've noticed that, and I think we'll discuss with the integrated care system, and particularly the Medway Swale Partnership, and not forgetting Faversham as well, if there's a natural point in the cycle where we could, feed in most effectively, and see if we can line those things up.
Makes sense.
Wonderful. If everybody is happy with the forward plan to accept that, I think that this is our last meeting before pre-election periods. So thank you very much, members, for your membership of the committee this year and your input. And see some of you, all of you, who knows, some none in May.
Well done, Chair.